So we're very fortunate to have Merryl Kravitz with us today, talking about teaching the COVID generation. And we thank her for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you, Merryl, to take it away.
Thank you, Teresa. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to welcome you and tell you a little bit about how I got to this topic. I was a professor at Highlands and prepared teachers for 19 years. And then I took a dean position out in California. And of course, in the real world, dean positions come and go. And so this year I took a position as a high school teacher teaching high school Spanish. Not only have things changed pretty significantly since 1994, when I was last a teacher in the classroom before I got to Highlands, but now, of course, we're facing COVID as well. And so I thought it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about what's out, what the students are doing, what we're doing, and propose some solutions, but also ask for some, because I most certainly do not have all the answers. So I do have a PowerPoint, and hopefully I'll be able to get it going here. I'm not particularly capable with the computer, but I've been teaching online for months already. So I think it should come up. It's working its way up. I've got the screen, but there it is. Can you all see the screen? Okay, yes. Good. Okay, so I think we've got, the title, as you notice, this is my original title, Teaching the COVID Environment, and somehow it became Teaching the COVID Generation. It did morph a little bit, but that's okay. We'll work with what we have. So let's see if I can get it to actually do something. This is not a good thing. There we go. Okay. So what does the classroom look like today? I left the classroom in '94. The changes, of course, are enormous. And in the COVID environment, and here's how I felt as soon as I got into the classroom. Definitely COVID shock, or culture shock. So here's the context. I've been out of the school since '94. I was given a class of 9th graders who are new to the school. I also have some classes of 11th graders, but the 9th graders are the toughest group to work with because they're brand new to the school. They don't know me. I don't know them. They don't know each other. Nobody knows each other in the classroom. And the only way they've met has been online in the COVID environment. They were online in middle school. Most of the middle schools here did have online instruction in the spring, but it was kind of all over the place. My students tell me that they were given assignments and told to just go do them and to check in every once in a while. And that was all in the spring. So when they came to school with us and I tried actually teaching and didn't say, here, go home and take these assignments with you, they were a bit surprised. So this was my idea of technology. And this is their idea of technology. We did have a little gap there. This is what I expected to see. I expect to see all these smiling, happy faces. And this is what I got. A lot of blank screens. Students who would not turn the cameras on. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why not. So why don't they want to turn these cameras on? I mean, we're all, almost all with our cameras on. Why did they refuse? And they're really adamant about it. We're not talking about they don't want to, but if you tell them to turn them on, they will. It's more like they'd rather leave and get marked absent than turn their camera on. So obviously they're uncomfortable with the camera. They're not willing to share their home. My students have Chromebooks, and the Chromebooks do not support the virtual backgrounds. So I'm seeing kids in their bedrooms with their beds, their sisters and brothers in the room with them. They're very uncomfortable with this. One kid, I was actually having a conversation with him, and his mom came in screaming at him. And he was, ever since then, he has not talked to me. He was that embarrassed about the whole thing. So the real world of their home is perhaps not, is definitely not the ideal place. I mean, you're seeing my home, but my home is my home. I don't share it with 12 other people. My cat may come in and start talking, but other than that, it's a relatively good environment. It's a study that I have here, but that's not the case with my students. There are many distractions at home. One of my students actually said that she uses her phone for her interactions at school rather than the Chromebook. And so we asked her why. She had a Chromebook. I mean, that was a better situation. She said, no, when I use the Chromebook, I have my phone to play games on. So I'm better off using my phone, and that way I'm not playing games on my Chromebook. So there are a lot of distractions, and the students, not all the students are ready to deal with those. Again, I mentioned the virtual backgrounds being unavailable. They don't want to be teacher's pet. If you show your face and nobody else does, then you're teacher's pet. You're kissing up to the teacher. And they're also uncomfortable with their peers. So for all of these reasons, they will not turn their cameras on. So this is my first impression. The first month I said, my God, they're tigers ready to attack. That's what they seem like. They were scary kids because I never saw them. Turns out this is who they are. They're real, gentle, nice kids. But at first, when we were having this tug of war of the camera, that's what I thought I was getting. They seemed so old. I taught middle school before, and these were high school kids. They seemed old and vicious. And this is who they turned out to be, little kittens. They're fine. But that first impression is based on never having seen a face, or maybe having seen it for 13 seconds. Other issues. Here's one that was brought up by one of my colleagues at my school. He said, here's the principle. The bigger the virtual room, the more students miss in terms of getting the material. So it's just like a lecture hall. I took classes with 400 students in psychology in my undergraduate work, and it's easy to lose people. Well, it's the same thing. The bigger the virtual room, the more you lose the students. My students are all willing to turn on the cameras one-on-one. They are not willing to turn on the cameras in front of their peers. There's more opportunity to tune out. If your camera's off, you can just walk away. Nobody knows the difference. Let's be honest. How many of us have walked away with our screen off? I know I certainly have. And so there's a sense of anonymity. And so that big virtual room is actually much worse than a smaller one. And that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. The distractions, noise and movement all around them, the cell phone, and there are no adults around. In many cases, my students' parents go to work all day. So they are the oldest kid in the house. And so everything is a distraction. The TV, any shiny little thing, blink, blink, and bling, bling, everything is absolutely a distraction for them. So I like to build this. I say, I want a sense of community. We're all going to be together in this. And this is what I got. So, you know, I kept facing this idea of, I had this great idea that we were going to be a team and work together. But what I got was kids with walls in between them, this sense of anonymity. And that line on our little boxes when we see each other was a huge line for them. It really broke, you know, it really caused some barriers. So I can't afford to spend all my time complaining about what I have. I have to talk about what I do, or what we do, or what we could do. So first, I've taken the time to talk to the kids about it. I haven't talked to them about them appearing to be tigers yet and just being little kittens. I don't think they want to be seen that way. So I haven't talked to them about that. But I have talked to them about why it's important for me to have the cameras on, why they would do better if they, I've talked about all these issues. And I make a case for interaction. Has it helped? Not particularly yet. I'm not going to tell you that as soon as I said that, they all turned their cameras on, we lived happily ever after. That would have been nice, but it's not true. And then I give them opportunities to interact with each other until it feels natural. So how do you do that? So at our school, we have a system of pleasantries. Whenever we come into a class, we spend 2 or 3 minutes just talking about anything, you know, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? What's your favorite whatever? You know, where do you want to go to college? Anything like that. What's your favorite movie? They can talk about anything. So what we do now is probably about once a week, we do speed pleasantries. This is modeled after, you know, speed dating and speed lunches, where you talk to somebody for 2 or 3 minutes and then you go on to the next person and then you go on to the next person and so on. Well, that's one way that they're forced to talk to each other one-on-one. Otherwise, they never talk to each other and they don't get to know each other at all. So I send them to a breakout room. to discuss their responses. Then 1 or 2 minutes later, bam, I change them to another room and they get to meet somebody else. And then bam, another minute or two later, off to another room again. So they're starting to meet the people in the class. You don't meet them when there's just a bunch of pictures on the screen, or even, names on the screen, not even pictures. But this way they're forced to at least talk to each other. Version 2 is when they got past version 1, they were getting a little better at it. I said, okay, here's some questions. And so we developed some questions together and they had to ask each other the questions. So again, they had to get to know somebody, and I gave them a little bit more than 1 to 2 minutes, gave them 3 to 4 minutes, and then again, change out the breakout rooms. And that works very easily because the computer will do that for you. It'll do it for you randomly. So I think the important thing to, sorry about that. I think the important thing to remember is last year when we all went online, the classes were already formed and there was a class culture. This year, there is no class culture unless we create it. So we're building from scratch. It's not just that we're teaching from scratch and we're teaching kids that we don't see, but we're trying to create a class culture without them ever having met. So some other activities, as often as possible, getting into small groups, breakouts, pairs, one-on-one, whatever it takes. And little by little, that's going better. I noticed that my 9th graders who didn't know each other at all started, I just said started, I didn't say always. Now 1 or 3 other people are starting to ask to go together for their work. Up till now, it was each one in their own room. But I've had about 3 other kids out of 20 start to ask. So now I have a total, there were 2 that were already together. So now I have a total of 5, or 25% of them are asking to work with somebody else. It's not great. I prefer 100%, but at least it's a start. Some group problem solving. We use the old stranded in the desert story where you're in the desert and you have to bring 5 things with you. What would you bring? And they had to get together. I did 5, you could do 10 items. They had to get together and decide what they would have to bring. This is a way to force them to talk, because when they come back to the larger group, they have to report out what they decided. So any little activities, any icebreakers that you know of that they can do under these circumstances. Another is to tell a story sequentially, so you can give them pieces of a story. Each one of them gets a piece. You send each one of them a piece, and then they have to get together in the room and put the pieces together in the right order. Again, they have to interact, because I think most of us depend on our students working in small groups in class. And if they're not willing to do it, or if they're scared of each other, then that's a problem. More solutions. I know I've had to do tellbacks a million times more than I ever did, even in middle school. And those kids are the worst for following instructions. Middle school is the absolute worst. These kids are 10 times worse virtually. Not because they're bad kids, but because they're walking away from the computer. So I give the instructions, I put them in chat. Sometimes I put them on a white sheet and just go over them there and post it so they can see it. And then I have them tell it back. And inevitably, I still have 3 or 4 people that still didn't get the instructions. So even with these, there's still a need for more. And I imagine college is not that much different, because I have 11th graders. We're not that far off. So I see Carol not shaking your head. Yeah, I have a feeling it's the same thing. I've been working with my students to get some noise canceling headphones for them. That seems to be helping some of the kids. One of my kids, for example, has his brother in the room, and his brother apparently doesn't seem to be going to school, although he looks like he's about 15, 16. And so he's lying in the bed, he's making the bed. My kid got up and helped him make the bed. I mean, these are the things that really happen. So if they have the noise canceling headphones, maybe they'll miss some of that. Most of my kids have other things going on around them. They don't have like a dedicated space like I have. And then I think it's important to be vulnerable and let them know. The kids are very understanding. I had gardeners mowing and making a racket out here. I had some repair people up on the roof, and I live in a condo, so I don't have a choice of when they come. The company sends them and that's it. So I share my frustration, so they understand that it happens to all of us. And they're very accommodating. They say, don't worry about it, doesn't bother us, or it's not that bad, or whatever. They try to be very understanding. Again, visit the breakout rooms to check for understanding. I have to do that. I know who my special needs students are now, so I go to them immediately, because usually they're the ones that won't even start until somebody tells them for sure what they're supposed to be doing. So I'll usually go to them first, but I try to go to as many rooms as I can. Again, if they double up or triple up and work together, that cuts the number of rooms I have to go to. I also have talked to them about going to school, because if you go to school in bed, there's no separation from bed to school. This is something psychological that I've heard people talk about already. So that if you go to school in bed, then you're not going to school. You're not making that change from home to school. And so it's important for them, even if they don't have a desk, it'd be really nice if they have a fancy desk, but even if it's to go to the couch or a table or anywhere else, they're making that transition from home to school. It's a psychological transition. Although bed, I imagine, also is tempting for kids to fall back asleep, but it's also a psychological transition that I am going to school. I'm actually making that change. So the results, I tried speed pleasantries once, nothing. I tried speed pleasantries twice, nothing. But then the third time, I think this is something that's incremental. It doesn't happen overnight. So then after I tried speed pleasantries twice and the group problem solving, that's when I started to get 3 more kids asking to work together. So it is working, but it's slow. It is slow. These are kids that have never seen each other before. They come from different schools. They never knew each other before they walked into that room, and they still don't. So I wanted to give you a little time to share. I don't know how our time is going here. I haven't been watching the time, but I wanted to hear some war stories and hear what are some of the strategies, some of the challenges you faced, and perhaps some of the strategies that you've used that have worked, or maybe you've experienced. We've got some students in the room. I don't know if the interpreter is allowed to also interact, but since there aren't terribly many of us here, I would ask Carol if that's permitted or not.
It would be permitted if they feel like they have something to offer and it won't distract from what they're already trying to do. So I'll leave it up to them what works. But I obviously do teach. I'm mentoring interpreters, from UNM now this week, in addition to teaching my own classes, and it's a lot of computer time. And I would say that the idea of shifting, and taking purposeful breaks, getting away from the computer is useful. And I know that I've had to make adjustments for my students based on their internet. We're supposed to be having, these hybrid type situation where we've got synchronous together work, because I'm teaching sign language and it's really important for them to get exposed to the language and to interact with one another. And so trying to build, like you say, that trust of them. I mean, it's really hard to build that trust to sign with each other, to turn their camera on, right? Because they're like, well, while you're introducing the vocabulary and I'm copying you, introducing the vocabulary, I feel really stupid and I mispronounce stuff and I look bad. And so I don't want my camera on, is what I've been told. And I'm like, well, if you have it on, I can see that you're mispronouncing it or that you're having difficulty pronouncing it, and I'll slow down and I will do it over again, or I'll give you a side view and I'll, give you an opportunity to try it again. And so it's taken a long time. And because we spent so much time just trying to get some kind of rapport going, we're way behind in the content. And I don't see us getting as far as, I have in the past with classes. And so that's a frustration, because they're using an ebook that they rent. And when the semester is over and we're supposed to move on to the next ebook, they don't have access to this book for us to make up any remediacy to go back unless they rent it again. And so that's frustrating, and there's no end to the frustrations. It's a challenge, but I like the ideas that you're sharing here. And I think if I hadn't just jumped in thinking we could just move ahead, that I could have saved some time in the beginning. I spent time with the tigers too.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I just assumed that, they had done online instruction in the spring, so they were ready to go. But when the kids told me that what they had gotten was, here's some work, take it and come back with it in 3 weeks. When I found out that's what they had done, I realized that suddenly I had to create a whole new world for them. And for sign language, it would be particularly important to have that camera on, because you can't, I mean, you can sign, but nobody can read it. That's just out of the question. So obviously you have an added, they can speak Spanish in my classroom and hear each other without the cameras on. But sign language, you'd be absolutely stuck. There's nothing you can do there.
Right, and then the recording features on Zoom are not sufficient. I can pin or spotlight myself, right? And then I'm recorded, and the PowerPoint, or visuals are recorded, but all of the other students are not recorded. And there are some students that their internet is so bad that when they try to turn on their cameras, they get kicked out. So they say, well, I have to have my camera off, because if I turn it on, the bandwidth isn't, I get kicked out of the class. And then they tell me that I froze, right? And I know it's something in the internet. And then I'm like, okay, so I froze or you froze? And between all of the freezing, they're not getting anything anyway. And so I told them, don't waste your time coming to class, getting kicked out, freezing, not being able to see anything, just watch the recording. But now the recordings are not really the class, because the interactive part is gone.
Right. Yeah.
And so I tell them, you have to find time to get on FaceTime or something and interact with somebody, but it's certainly not ideal.
Yeah, there's so many challenges, and I can't even imagine trying to teach sign language that way. I'm having enough trouble teaching Spanish, so I can't even imagine. I don't know about the rest of you. You can turn your camera on if you like, or turn off your mic. I'm gonna probably destroy your name, but Shail? Hi.
Here he is.
Dr. Kravitz.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Well, how are you? I just stepped in to say hello. It's been 20 years since I've seen you.
That long. Oh my goodness, great.
You probably don't. Yeah, you probably don't remember me. But I had my first
now that
Thanksgiving.
once I saw your face, it helped.
Yeah. But no, yeah, it's been 20 years or longer.
Wow. Well, I did start at Highlands in '94, and I left in 2013.
Yeah, well, I was there in 1998, and I had my first ever Thanksgiving dinner in the US at your house. I still remember that.
I do remember that part. I had to see your face though, because the name, the name didn't do anything for me, because we have so many people with unusual names here. I guess that kind of fills up.
Yeah. But I didn't mean to interrupt.
But as soon as I saw your face, that helped. So, well, good. Have you had more Thanksgiving dinners since?
Yes. Thank you.
Good. They're probably better. That year, I was so upset because I didn't realize that some of you might be vegetarians. And so I was real worried about the food situation, because there was plenty of food that didn't have meat in it, but it wasn't well planned around that. There's a difference between happening to have some vegetables and planning something for vegetarians.
Yeah.
And so I was very embarrassed.
It was great.
I was very embarrassed.
Thanks so much. I still remember that, but I didn't mean to interrupt at all.
Not at all.
Sorry if I did.
We're just kind of having a conversation about the challenges that we face trying to teach online in the COVID situation.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to mute myself and I'm just going to listen. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome to jump in anytime. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of people here, so anybody can jump in anytime. I don't think you have to raise your hand or anything.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting what you're talking about, that many of these students feel very awkward sharing their home spaces. And it's just not something, when we went into this, we even considered as being a challenge. It's almost as if it's almost taken us 9 months to figure out basically what you have to do in order to keep yourself safe from infecting someone or, potentially infecting yourself. And yet kids were thrown into these learning environments, online learning environments, without a lot of that kind of study by, qualified, scientists, educators, and so on, to kind of inform the experts as to how to then relay the information. So it's, and it made me wonder that within your own school system, are there now kind of suggestions or certain kind of protocols put into place as to how to help instructors, teachers, and so on begin, this process with new students who are very new to this kind of experience? Or is everyone still pretty much trying to figure it out, depending upon, their situation? Because
I think you're right. It's largely the latter. I know I went in as an experienced teacher, but again, with that gap from 94 to 2020, I would say that was experienced in another generation altogether. So I would have appreciated somebody saying something to me. Nobody said anything like the kids won't turn on their cameras. It never occurred to me. And then what I got when they turned on the cameras didn't bother me. But look around, look at your beautiful homes that you're in front of. And then my students were in their bedrooms with the bed unmade, with the ceiling fan going, and everything was looking like this because the sun was reflecting it and so on. I mean, that's just the least of what was going on, with screaming going on in the rest of the house, kids coming in. My students are 9th graders, the mentees that I have, the first group. And they have, in many cases, little ones at home, and you see them going, shh, and you hear all this racket going on. I mean, these are the things, I bent down to pet my cat, but that's about my own distraction. Mm-hmm. So, and these are things that kids can't be in charge of. I have one that has to leave every day at about 9 o'clock to get his brother onto the computer because he has a 5-year-old brother or a 6-year-old that can't get onto the computer by himself. So every day his parents are gone, so he gets up and he leaves my class and he goes over and gets his kid brother started. Maybe the sister too, I don't know, there's 2 of them. And so he's in charge of all of this. And so after a while, he just quit coming. It's mentoring, it's not a class, so they can sort of get away with that. But even so, they just decided that, taking care of the brother and sister became more important.
Yeah. Yeah.
The school has worked on getting hotspots and other equipment. All the kids have Chromebooks, so we're good with that. They have the noise canceling headsets for the kids, and we kind of do a lot of triage. A kid says to me, my computer's not working. Okay, what's wrong with it? And so even though I don't know computers very well, we can usually get it down to it's the computer, it's the bandwidth. It's, we try to sort out what it is, because if it's the bandwidth, we get them a hotspot. If it's the computer, we might have to trade it in. If it's something else, if they don't know how to use it, largely they knew how to use it though. That was, I had 9th graders, they were pretty good already. Mm-hmm. So, we had to do a lot of triage at the beginning to make sure everybody had what they needed, and it still pops up from time to time. I had 2 kids today could not access an evaluation that I gave them that they had to do. They couldn't access it. Everybody else did. So it wasn't what I put out there. It was the fact that one of them turned out wasn't using the school computer. A school computer works better with the school materials. They're on a platform, so it's actually easier that way. And then another one, I had to send it 5 million different ways until he was able to access it. So yeah, we're still experiencing that.
So how does it affect the kind of the standardized testing that had been put into place a number of years ago, which, so many issues with anyhow. I mean, I know a lot of schools have kind of done away with even SATs and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm sorry. So how are schools dealing with that?
Well, as far as I can tell here in California, pretty much everybody's done away with that. There's no SATs going on, there's no ACTs going on, and I can testify the fact that there's no CBEST going on, because I had to get my license. I had to produce my CBEST, and I could not get the CBEST.
Oh.
And so I was very fortunate that just a few years ago, about 50, I happened to have taken the SAT, and I knew my scores were sufficient, but I had to get a copy of the SAT test. And that wasn't easy because my stuff isn't archived digitally.
Right.
So I know that I still had problems. I didn't get my license until just like a month ago, and the school did up my salary based on that. But I couldn't really go out to the public schools. I had to go to a charter school because nobody would take me without a license in hand.
Right.
And I had a New Mexico license, but I didn't have a California license. So even there, with somebody who comes with beaucoup experience and so on, I was able to get a job, but perhaps not the one that I would have liked. And so the testing is a huge issue. The colleges, the CSU system and the UC system in California, have done away with requiring those exams for this year. Now that's a biggie, because the UCs, for example, only accept about 15% of all students who apply.
It's very
So
tough.
on what basis are they making those decisions? It's going to have to be strictly GPA, the letter that the student writes, you know, but on the other, you know, that's the one side. On the other side, though, if these exams are really biased, as we believe they probably are, against people of color or people who come from poor areas, then maybe this is a good thing because somebody forced their arms. Somebody forced them to get rid of them. So to that extent, maybe it's a good thing. They're going to have to come up with some other ways to make decisions about students. How do you separate the student from that student, both with a 4.0? They're going to have to look at something else. And SATs, we know that standardized tests tend to discriminate against people of poor communities. We've seen that over and over and over again. We saw it at Highlands. We saw the NES exams that you were using over, that you're still using over there. We saw those work in favor of the students who came from majority communities, middle class, and so on. And teachers are getting knocked out, even in New Mexico, Native American communities, particularly because of the language barriers. Many of them still are struggling with English. And I'm not saying because they don't know English, but because they learn the English of their community, which is a different English than you would find on the exam. Perfect example of a test. I actually sat on the review board for the teacher exam in New Mexico. And while I was there, I found two questions that it had already been cleaned up by the multicultural review board. But listen to the two questions that I ran into. One was, you're driving on a toll highway and you have to pay a toll. What do you, I don't even remember what the rest of the question was. Do you see any bias there?
Yeah.
You don't have toll highways in New Mexico.
Exactly.
So you're expecting somebody to know something that they've never experienced. Now, if they've been out of New Mexico, fine. But many of my teachers had never left New Mexico and didn't know what a toll highway was. And I asked them, I said, let me find out. A second example that I ran into was they had a little kid in one, they had a scenario. And in the scenario, a little kid who couldn't read. And guess where that little kid, the kid didn't speak English very well. Guess where that kid was from? Another country, has to be another country. What do you think? Kid can't read very well, living in New Mexico, doesn't speak English. What country are they from?
I'm going to assume Mexico.
Of course. But why couldn't the kid be from Germany?
Right.
Okay, so those are the kinds of cultural bias that you sometimes find in exams. That's small. I mean, nobody meant any harm. Mexico's right across the border. It seems like a logical choice. But why not Canada? They could come from Quebec and speak French, but nothing like that. Okay, immediately you hit it, Julie, of course. It's the Mexican kid that doesn't speak well. You know, we have to be careful of those kinds of things. And it actually happened in one of the classes that I was supervising. I had a student teacher whom I was supervising, and he had a story, and the gist of the story was that somebody saw a killing across the street in a building right across from them, but there was an L in between. So did they or did they not see what happened? Does anybody know what an L is? I asked my teacher that. The
Oh,
teacher didn't know what the L was.
Oh, they're talking about the train, the elevated train?
Correct.
Oh my gosh. Who would know that unless you lived in Chicago, New York?
Exactly. But the student teacher, I said to him, do you know what an L is? He said, no. I said, okay, then you're missing the whole point of the story. That what happened was the train came, when the murder occurred, apparently the train came by. So could the person see clearly through the train windows as it whizzed by to the opposite side? Now that wasn't a test question, but it was just another example of the cultural bias that exists. And cultural doesn't have to be against an ethnicity. It can be against, for example, it could be rural versus urban. In the case of the toll highway. Okay, urban dwellers would probably know what a toll highway. Wow. Feedback there. But the urban dweller and rural dweller would not. So those are the kinds of things we have to always watch out for in our testing. So when I hear that the SAT and the ACT and perhaps the teacher exam are being shelved for a while, you don't see me out there crying too much.
Right.
Because I worry about those kinds of questions, because I know they're not, I mean, my native people, my native students who live in Navajo land, for example, in Theru, who live on one of the reservations in one of the pueblos, do they, you know, the ones who come from San Juan, from Santa Clara, have they been to California and seen a toll highway? On the other hand, if somebody came from there and asked about a kiva, they wouldn't do very well either. But the test is twisted in one direction. It's loaded in one direction. And so I do worry about those exams and what they tell us and what they don't tell us about our students' ability to teach. So that's a very long answer to a very brief question. The exams are on hold pretty much everywhere. There are some exams being given. One of my colleagues has not gotten his exam, and it looks like he's going to be able to take it. He has to travel a ways, but he is able to get the CBEST. Apparently a few places have opened.
Wow, a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we're going to be in this for a while too, because certainly through the spring, you know, who knows, maybe into fall. I don't know if another 6 months will, you know, change kind of the way that the students are feeling about this or not. I mean, there's certain things that cannot be changed, that aren't school related, but still affect their learning experience and the ability to get online and have that quiet space. But yeah, it's crazy, really crazy. But Shale, I think you have two children? Is that what I recall from one of our earlier conversations?
I do, Julie. So a 14-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Right.
And
so how are they doing with the whole online thing?
well, so they are both 100% online. We have an option to go to school part-time or, you know, partly, but we've chosen to have them do completely online. First month was a struggle. With technology failing and whatnot. I mean, it was very confusing. Now it's humming. Now they know what to do, they know where to go, and it's sort of falling in place. But we still have trouble with technology every once in a while, saying that, oh, this link is not working, or the Google Sheets is not opening, or something or the other is going on. But it's much better than where it was in the first month.
No.
That's good. And how about the little one? You said one is 7. Does the
7,
little one get on without any trouble, or?
The first month, after the first hour, he was rolling on the carpet saying, oh, I'm tired and sleepy.
Yeah, my goddaughter has a 4-year-old at home, and she goes to school 2 afternoons a week.
Yeah.
And she said she has to be there at every moment to make sure she doesn't just walk away, because she doesn't really understand that school's there in that box.
Yeah, yeah. But they're missing out on that social interaction and all the activities that they used to do outside of school. So soccer is off, everything is just closed. And I think it adversely affects in some way or the other. But I hope this ends soon, though. I mean, hopefully soon. We'll see.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
the psychologists are out there doing huge numbers of studies on COVID children. Not that I think that anything awful is going to happen to them, but they're looking to see if, socialization is happening properly and so on. And of course, they won't have the answers to this until the kids get back into the classroom and they're in a real school. You're fortunate if you have two kids because they can interact with each other at least. But
Yes.
I know that my goddaughter put her kid on a soccer team because she just couldn't handle the idea that she's been away from other kids for this long.
Yeah.
But then, of course, you take chances on COVID. I mean, whatever decision you make, you're putting yourself in a funny position.
Absolutely.
But I know that the schools that have opened up for elementary school kids and high school kids, some of them have had to close already. And if they haven't closed, we're seeing large jumps in the number of cases because, they're carrying it. Even if they're not getting it, they're carrying it around with them. So I think you're wise to do it from home, but I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know. And I'm sure you supplement a lot also at home in terms of education.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there is so much going on in those it's learning pages that sometimes it's very confusing to maneuver around. So the older one is very helpful. He knows exactly where to go and what to look for, and so I'm sort of falling behind on technology now. It's much more advanced than I can handle, really.
You just try me.
Yeah.
That is a challenge also, the technology. The kids don't seem to have much trouble with it though.
No.
The Chromebooks, on the other hand, seem to have limitations in terms of what they have. So I was showing the kids, for example, how you can get two speakers up on just having them there, not just one. One you can just say speaker view, but you can actually hit that little green button, the shield, and then tell the camera to take everybody who's got their camera off the screen. You can just see the people talking. And they said, what green button? And so I realized that the Chromebooks, for some reason, limit what you see, which doesn't make any sense because I thought it was built in, but I guess it isn't. So they don't have the reactions that we have. I had the smiley faces and the clapping hands and stuff like that. They had only the clapping hands, I think, none of the others. So some of the Chromebooks are limited in terms of what they'll do.
Yeah.
Just to add to the confusion. And of course, I didn't know this. I had to learn it from the kids when I said, just hit that little green button over there. They said, what green button? And we were arguing for a good 10 minutes. I said, it's up there in your left-hand corner. It's shaped like a shield. It has a little arrow and a little check mark in it. Nothing. They didn't have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we're quickly approaching our time. I don't know if anybody else had anything else that they wanted to share, because I'm anxious to hear your suggestions too. And I'm going to turn on my light here because I'm sitting here in the dark and you're not seeing me very well. That should help a little bit anyway. There we go. So does anybody have anything that you've seen, any suggestions? As a parent, do you have any thoughts of what you wish teachers would do?
Well, I mean, I guess everyone is trying to keep up with what is going on and, trying to do their jobs as best as they can. I think if COVID continues the next year, we'll see better user experience in terms of Chrome and the other side of the desk, meaning the teacher's end. The videos are sometimes not very clear and things like that. So Teachers are getting used to it. There are some teachers who are not as adept to the technology as no one really expected that we would be going all online. So I hope things get better, and definitely some challenges across the board, this side of the desk as well as on the other side. So I have trouble keeping my 7-year-old attentive. That's the big part.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Anybody else? You said something that I already thought about, and that is that, I always taught my students to send a letter home as soon as they came on board as the teacher. And I was just so upside down with learning all the technology. My school has its own technology on top of Zoom. It has its own platform that I had to learn. And so that threw me for such a loop that I really didn't do what I know I should have done. I used to teach my students to do it, to send a letter home. So you reminded me, thank you, that I need to send a letter home and talk to the parents a little bit, communicate with them about what's going on and let them know what my expectations are. So I think that's a good point. Thank you. Anybody else with any other thoughts on this?
Well, I guess on the bright side, you're not having to teach an acting class or a class in how to movie. I mean, there's just so many things that, I just can't even imagine how it could even begin to get to, because there's so many kinds of learning that actually have to be physically there, whether it's physically using something, but, just that kind of being in the same space, really informs the interaction. Yeah, there was, I read an article about a theater group in LA that's been doing drive-in theater in downtown LA. Well, I think it says just south of downtown LA. And so it's becoming a whole nother way for them to bring theater to neighborhoods where theater could not be experienced, which is kind of interesting, because there's lots of the arts that are really unavailable, to people, because of distance or lack of being able to, or even knowing about it. So I think there's some really interesting things going on, but yeah, it's a whole nother, it's crazy. Crazy stuff.
One of the theaters that I usually buy season tickets for actually has put out a whole season of virtual theater.
Wow.
And they're selling tickets for it. So yeah, I mean, what I can say is that there's been quite a bit of creativity. The other thing that's happened is, in some ways, I've connected better because of this. Because, for example, I never went to homecoming. Not even when I was there at Highlands, because I said I didn't graduate from Highlands. So why do I need to go to homecoming? But here it was right on my computer. It's right in my house. Mm-hmm. I've done the same thing. I joined a book group, a book club down in Santa Fe. They're from Santa Fe, and they're lovely people. I really enjoyed them. And so I'm going to go back. I just wanted to discuss that one book, but what the heck, now they had another book, and I can't make the second one, but I can make the third. So I'm already planning. So my boundaries have changed. I don't have to attend things here in San Jose and the Bay Area. I can attend things in Amherst, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. They have talks from the Yiddish book club there. And so I can join the Yiddish book club over there. I mean, it's just, I can access places that I guess I could have accessed previously, but I never felt the need to, because I had everything right here. San Jose has everything. But now San Jose doesn't have anything. And so it's all online. So yeah, I found that I've reached out to other places, but I'm not sure that kids know how to do that. And the kids, of course, want the physical stuff. I have kids that play soccer, for example, in my classes, who are just dying because they're very active kids, and the loss of that physicality in their lives is creating a lot of stress for them. You know, the soccer teams are canceled and, you know, all this other stuff. And so I have one that, you know, he's the one I thought of when I think about going to school in bed. He's always lying down when I get him, and he just never gets out of bed to go to class. And yet his soccer games are canceled. And so here's somebody who his goal is to become an NFL player. Okay, I know that's not really realistic, but okay, you know, this is his dream. I'm not taking his dream away from him, but somebody else is now. COVID is taking his dream away from him. He's not even practicing. How's he ever going to get NFL if he can't even play with the local kids? So it's been quite a challenge for the kids. I certainly don't, you know, as an adult, I'm 67 years old. If I don't go out today, oh well, it's no big deal. And I just happen to be a lucky one. I have an atrium right in the middle of my house. So I can go outside and never see another human being and not worry about contagion. So for me, it's not a problem. But what about for the kids? To never get fresh air, to never be with other kids, and not to let out all that steam that they have from sitting in front of the computer all day. Not easy. Carol, how are your kids aren't kids anymore, of course. They're adults now. Of course, when I knew them, they were kids.
Yeah, well, let's see. They both have birthdays coming up in November, and they will be 23 and 25.
Wow.
And Nikki, the youngest one, she got a job in her college town in Montana. And so her sister has gone up there to live with her. And so I'm an empty nester now. Nikki even came down last weekend. Yeah, I guess not this most recent weekend, but the one before that, and picked up her entire goat herd and put it in a trailer and headed north.
So is Nikki working online also, or is she face-to-face?
She's actually going into work. She works for Wells Fargo, and she does phone stuff where she's actually answering questions for Wells Fargo banks, you know, so she's the person actually giving information. So she had to go through quite a bit of training. So if they've got questions, they call that, you know, they call her. So she's doing well. And then Christina's doing an internship, and it's a pilot type program. They get to do an internship with like 3 different companies for 2 months each. And because it's a pilot program, she's not paying for the internship opportunity. It's free. And they just want her feedback on, you know, how well their internship is organized. And so that's what she's doing right now, but hoping to get a job up there. But as you know, it's not easy now. She just finished her master's in English at Highlands.
Wow. Well, the whole job situation, I think for kids that age or adults that age, I think the biggest challenge for them, you know, the young kids, the challenge is going to school on the computer. But for that next generation, the big challenge is how to get a job at a time when unemployment is surging. And then how do you make ends meet, especially in a place like this where I was just talking to my kids about it, the average apartment in Redwood City where they live, 1 bedroom is $2,400 a month. So I said, okay, I want you all go research your job. And I put 2 shills in there. And I said, please go research being a hamburger flipper. And we ran the numbers, and they made $1,800 a month being a hamburger flipper. And the average rent is $2,400. And then we're not even talking about paying the bills, you know, the electricity or the food or the gas for the car. We're just talking about the rent. They can't even make the rent. So then we got somebody who was a manager at a McDonald's. I put them up to this because nobody was aspiring to it. But she made enough to pay the rent, but then nothing else. There was nothing left over to pay for anything else. And so, you know, I'm trying to let them see that, you know, they really, a lot of them they're almost all first generation American or 1.5. So they were born here, but they speak, or they came as children, or their parents almost all are immigrants. And so the parents are struggling, especially in jobs where they haven't been needed as much, cleaning houses, cleaning offices, gardening, where a lot of them were cut off for a while, and some still are. And so, not to disparage those jobs, because their parents are probably working harder than I am. You know, it's physical, heavy duty labor. So I'm not disparaging those jobs at all, but I want to encourage the kids to aspire to something more, so they're not in that situation. I mean, here I am, I'm working, it's no problem. Yeah, you know, it's not exactly what I'd hoped for, but I'm able to work. And I have my income from Highlands already, so I don't have a problem in the world. But for their parents, I mean, I had a cleaning lady, I paid her for a month. That first month that we were off, I said, here, let me pay you anyway, because I knew that she had no other income except from the people for whom she cleans. That is her income.
I have a student who just aged out of foster care and is working in a nursery, and she joins my class from this nursery daycare with her mask on, and that's the only place where she has access to internet.
Wow.
And she's trying to go to college, and she's just starting. She's and I mean, talk about a challenge.
That that in between, Jerry, the kids at least have a safe place to live in most cases. Although some of my students are talking about, you know, maybe having to move and so on because they can't afford the rent. A lot of them are piling in, so there's 2 and 3 and 4 families living together, so they can afford to pay the bills. There's some of that, but on the whole, you know, if they're gardening or whatever, they're managing to do the work. It's outdoors and they can continue working. But the kids coming out of college now are really struggling, because where do they even get a job? So yeah. Any good news? Well, Carol had good news, and Shayo had good news. I mean, there is good news out there. It's just we have to define it differently.
Right.
Definitely, definitely. Kind of keep a list of gratitudes. They're out there.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So, and as it goes longer and longer and longer, nobody figured it would go this long.
No.
And I think I know I was hoping for February, March at the latest to have a vaccine, but because we don't have anything even close yet, and then they're having trouble, that apparently the most recent one has trouble because the vaccine that they're producing has to be stored below zero, in sub-zero, well below zero temperatures. We're not sure how it's going to, I mean, once it gets past the truck, which they can, I guess, get down to that temperature, how do they get the doctor's offices, the pharmacies, etc., to meet those requirements? And so that's probably going to build a whole new industry of new ice boxes or freezers or something that can freeze below, you know, at that temperature. So we're talking about the whole society is going to have to change their way of thinking around this vaccine, or it's not going to be useful. So now I'm hearing summer, which is really scary. We're talking over a year.
Wow.
But again, we don't know. Hopefully sooner. Anyway, I should probably end, because I know you're probably all wanting to go to dinner and eat something. So thank you so much for coming. And I know this was largely a required audience, but nevertheless, it was fun and it was wonderful to see you.